All right, mates, welcome back to the channel. JL Scott Fishing. Hope everybody's doing well and having a great year so far. This is the companion video to the first part of jerkbait fishing, so we're going to talk a little bit about jerkbaits. First and foremost, though, I want to thank everyone I met. It's an awesome weekend. Richmond Fishing Expo. Crazy turnout in Richmond again annually. It's great to catch up with some people I haven't seen in a long time, but also making a lot of new friends. We picked up about 200 followers on YouTube and about 1,000 followers on TikTok. Just going around talking to folks, talking to a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of the producers, some of the professional anglers. It was great catching up with the folks from Woods and Waters, all that kind of stuff. These shows are just a great time for all had, family and all. So it was really great. But we're going to get into the jerkbait. And I know you guys might be tired of talking about jerkbaits. Wintertime, it's always a popular video topic in the wintertime. I'm kind of coming at it from a different angler. I kind of talked to some professional anglers at the expo as well to kind of get their take, on things that I saw this year on the river, which is not a big tournament. These rivers, mates, are your rivers, okay? These are not your big tournament rivers, okay? And there's the distinction that I think gets missed a lot. And that's why I think there's a lot of value in some other YouTube channels out there that aren't really focusing on the, just following what the pros are doing, because the pros don't often fish where we fish, mates. And we're seeing that a lot in the kayak fishing. I'm going to do another video on that, how kayak fishing is even getting away from its roots. It really is, in terms of when we think of how we fish as anglers with our kayaks in our river systems. I mean, you can just think locally, like Monocacy, Allegheny, Upper Potomac, Shenandoah, Maury, new to a lesser extent because it's pretty deep and wide and, in sections. Susquehanna's massive in sections. But then there's also areas where, it's a lot smaller. And a lot of the stuff that's in play on these rivers is not the same stuff in play on the Tennessee River, right? Or on these rivers, that you're watching, the St. Lawrence, for example, that are on the professional bass, that the anglers are traditionally fishing. They're not really coming to your local river system, right? Which can set up completely different, which is why I think a lot of people struggle, is a lot of people try to apply what they're taking from YouTube or taking from watching MLF or Bass on TV, go big or go home kind of stuff, and trying to pigeonhole it into their own local river system. And a lot of times it does not work. And it was really interesting to watch if you were at the Fishing Expo. And I encourage you to, there's a bunch coming up. I'll post that on Facebook and in the newsletter, the Smallmouth Army newsletter, which a lot of this information, a lot of the stuff from mine now for 2023, my topics, when I'm talking techniques and I'm talking things that I'm seeing on the river, that's all going to be in the newsletter, mate. So it's a lot deeper dive, more information, more resources. This medium is more like, people want get to it, get out, boom, move on. That's kind of like the culture that we have now. It's less about learning. It's more about visual, those kinds of things, unfortunately. But that's how you're really going to change your catch rates, is dialing in on that information and applying it to your fishery. Because it's just not the same, mates. And jerkbait fishing is one of the biggest kind of broadest things that you're going to get, and crankbaits a lot as well, on so many different things being hit at you about do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. But in reality, it's all about the conditions of your river system. And so for all the techniques that we talk about with jerkbait fishing, right? We talk about slow rolling. We talk about jerking or twitching. We talk about pausing or our, pausing on our retrieves, varying our retrieve speed, varying the depth of our jerkbaits, all that stuff you're inundated with, right? And very few people talk to you about what the real number one thing that you should focus on when you're throwing a jerkbait, and before you even throw a jerkbait, in terms of determining what kind of jerkbait, how you're going to present that jerkbait, what rate of retrieve are you going to use with that jerkbait, which method or technique are you going to use, is water clarity. That's the only fact, that's the number one and only major factor that's going to determine whether or not you're going to get bit or not on a jerkbait. My opinion. And everybody that I've talked to, okay? Because no one has an interest in convincing you anything about water clarity. Because water clarity is not for sale, mates. It's not a bait. It's not a line. It's not a rod. It's not a reel, right? There's tons of information out there on YouTube and everywhere else on what's the best rod length. What's the best, you should throw fluorocarbon, not mono, or you should do this or not this. And all that stuff is predicated on, right? Equipment, sales, right? Pitching you brands, pitching you products, right? No one pitches you water clarity, and no one pitches you sun brightness and sunlight penetration. No one pitches you the biology, because you know what? There's no vested interest in the sale of that. No one's been able to capture how to actually sell that, right? I mean, that's the difference. But the reality of it is all the other stuff can be true. But if the water conditions and the sunlight conditions of what you're experiencing on the water are not optimum, none of that is going to matter. And that is what should signal to you to go away from the jerkbait and to something else. Those conditions don't present themselves. And a lot of people will try to convince you that jerkbait is only for cold water. It's only for wintertime fishing. Again, it's not. Plenty of tournaments have been won on a jerkbait in summertime. Okay? It's like, like people used to say stuff a lot about spinnerbait conditions. And yet there are people who win tournaments on spinnerbaits all year round. Right? And so what I'm going to talk about right now is something that was glaringly obvious if you were paying attention, if you were at the expo at Meadow Event Park over the weekend, and you went to any of the seminars, okay? You had perfect, optimal conditions for the bass in the tank, right? Now, some people will say, oh, well, they don't feed them, so that's why. No, they're fed, okay? They're taken care of. They're monitored by state and all that stuff. It's the way it is these days, mate. Someone's just going to put fish in a freaking tank all weekend long and not monitor their conditions, right? I don't think they lost a fish like all weekend long. But optimum conditions, right? Packed room, everybody's there, tank is there, okay? Water, clear as can be, right, mates? You can see through the tank to the wall and the curtain on the other side, right? Water clarity, perfect conditions. Water temperature, perfect. Right? Water clarity, perfect. Angler up on the deck, perfect. Right? Did not matter what color any of those spinnerbaits were. Did not matter what color any of those Senkos during the finesse fishing demonstrations were. Okay? Why? Because the water was clear. The water clarity was optimum. And those are the conditions that a lot of times you get in the wintertime, which is why jerkbait fishing is predominantly effective as opposed to a lot of other baits. But then yet jig fishing is also highly productive in the wintertime. Why is that? Okay? And so the reality is there's less stuff in the water. Out on the river, hardly any grass in December and January, right? February, right, mates? So the sunlight coming in isn't being taken up by a lot. It's all rocky gravel, shell bed. There's not much, right? There's not much. There's not grass moving like this. There's not, all that stuff's died out. So the light penetration comes straight in depending on what time of day. And I tell people this, and it's awesome. I'm getting great feedback from people that I've shown this to out of the water, and I've talked to people giving me advice, and they've come back and told me that it was working. It's where you start out your day in the winter, any time of the year, but in the wintertime, the sun rises in the and sets in the, okay? So if that's the case, if the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, okay, then the sun's coming up on one side of the river, right? Throwing sunlight on an angle on the river to the opposite bank, right? And then as the day progresses, the sunlight shifts, and in the evening bite is on the other side of the river in the wintertime, a lot of times for smallies. And that's what you find in the upper Potomac. The banks in the shallower water, Now, mind you, we're only talking about 3 to 4 feet of water a lot of times in the wintertime. So the water on the bank that has been hit by the sun for the longest period of time from sunrise to the afternoon, again, is warmer, right? Than the opposite bank. And then the opposite bank after midday begins to get sunlight, okay? And remember, every degree matters, okay? And so you want to start, if you're fishing, and I tell people I start on the Virginia side, okay? And then at the end of the day, I finish on the Maryland side. And I work the pattern with a jerkbait because the fish are working a pattern, okay? They're either moving from 2 feet of water, outside seam lines, away from strong current in the wintertime, to then middle of the afternoon is the sun to the middle of the river, and then a lot of times either back or back over, depending on how wide the area is. If you've got island breaks, it's also a different. They bounce off the islands, between the islands and the side, either the Virginia side or the Maryland side. And again, that sunlight penetrating the water has less, obstacles and grass and all that stuff in the water, so that light oftentimes goes right down to the bottom. That's why the jig bite is also extremely effective, right? So that light and clarity is what allows the fish to see your bait, track your bait, come up for your bait. Now, we saw that in the tank during the fishing expo. Topwater baits, clear water, drew the bass's attention up. Okay? Did not matter what the color was, mates. It did not matter at all. It was noise, okay, a disturbance in the water column, and, okay, sight of knowing something's different, feeling that across, you could say across their lateral line of their body, but whatever. That disturbance in the water, again, triggers that reaction, head up, moving up. And you saw that if you watched the various different seminars where a lot of the anglers focused on different techniques, from Davey Height doing finesse fishing, to spinnerbait fishing, to jig, to all the different techniques. And you could watch the reactions of the bass, okay, in terms of what they were seeing in that kind of controlled environment. And so a lot of times when you're jerkbait fishing, you want to pull, you're going to be bass looking up, right? Trying to get the bass's attention off the bottom where they would be feeding on a jig, right? To looking up and drawing them up, okay? And in clearer water, with that light penetration, it is more effective. So then you gauge on your water depth what you're going to do. Now, if you're in 2, 3, 4 feet of water, people are like, oh, you can't throw a jerkbait in there. That's not true. One of the biggest mistakes that people make with jerkbait fishing is they go too big, okay? Because they're watching a lot of YouTube videos, and God bless them, and people are being pushed to YouTube videos in Texas and California, right? We know those guys. Like, the awesome YouTube channels. But that's not going to apply to your fishery. A 5-inch jerkbait is probably not going to apply to 2.5 to 3.5 feet of water in your river system in the Mid-Atlantic or in, the Northeast. It probably's not. It may apply in your larger lakes, obviously Champaign, Winnipesaukee, big lakes, Lake Anna, things like that are bigger lakes, okay, but not your river systems. So in river systems, you want to go smaller, right? 4-inch to less. The bait fish are a smaller size bait fish during these periods of time, right? And as you get to spring, you may want to upgrade your size. But apply what you learn in the winter to in the spring. And we all know what happens with the grass and all of that stuff. And so what a lot of people don't kind of apply is something that I like to do that I learned years ago, fishing places like Briary Creek in Virginia, because it's so heavily inundated with wood, fallen timber, down trees, and then flooded, right? Lots of lakes have been built that way. It's been flooded, all the trees have been falling down, right? And a lot of people lose crankbaits, a lot of people lose jerkbaits, a lot of people lose all that stuff because of this timber is not resting on the bottom per se, although it is in a lot, but it's also up, angled, above, and they lose a lot of baits. And a lot of that is not changing out and reducing the size of your hooks, okay, in a traditional jerkbait. And it's one of the easiest methods you can do to increase your strikes and hookups with a jerkbait is not go with the standard hooks. You can use smaller hooks and still now most people are fishing jerkbaits in open water, right? And they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about getting hung up on anything. They're in open water, deeper water, in the middle of a lake, impoundment, reservoir, and the smallies are coming up, like in mine in Western Maryland. I have a few baits that predominantly work there that don't work in the river, right, as effective. This jerkbait is absolutely one of them, right there. Okay? There's a re-range, okay? It's a Jackal re-range, okay? This bait is one of the most effective jerkbaits you can throw in Western Maryland and in Virginia impoundments with that bright chartreuse bottom. But it's not nearly as effective in the Potomac River, the upper Potomac or the tidal Potomac, or the Allegheny or the Monocacy, Susquehanna. It's just not. And so that's how you have to dial in necessarily the patterns of what you're looking for in terms of not only the bait fish that exist but also the conditions, okay, of how that's going to be. In a lot of instances, especially brighter lighted light full sun conditions, the most successful ones are very simple. It's the silver and the gold. This one's been a highly effective jerkbait on the river, on multiple rivers. It's got that gold in it, right? And that gold, that light just beams off of that gold, okay? Okay, it's also got that hinge, okay, that rose red hinge to it that mimics that dying bait fish, slowing bait fish in the wintertime. You're slow rolling this, you're twitching. And one of the things with the twitch, a lot of times what you're going to find is, and everyone's familiar with it, twitch, pause, right? But what I have found is 90% of the hookups are not on the pause. They're on the twitch, pause, and then your first pop, your first move off the pause. Okay? That's when you normally get strikes. It's not on the twitch necessarily. I mean, you can catch them any state of that, depending on your rate of retrieve. But your twitch, and your pause, and then as soon as you make that move, that next move is 90, at least in my experience, 90% of the time is when you're going to get smacked. Okay? And it's not all about all these bright megabass colors either that are all great, that look sexy and catch your eye, and you're spending $25, $27, when you get the same amount of catch rate, the same hookups, and the same tracking enticement from simple jerkbaits that look like that. Okay? Simple shiner, shad, okay, like perchy type colorations you're going to find all over your pond, your lake, and the river, okay? It's not all crazy colors, all right? Because the bass are going to pick, especially smallies, they're opportunistic. They're going to pick that up in the light, in those conditions, and you're gonna entice strikes with your jerkbait. And so a lot of people make those mistakes of not understanding, okay, what's the water condition? What's the sun condition? So a lot of people are familiar with overcast, lower light conditions, and then swapping out. Are you going with a suspended jerkbait, right? Are you going more, just look at these, the differences now you have. You saw this at the expo, mates. The custom guys are just knocking it out of the park because they're not using universal sizes on the bill anymore, okay? That basically everybody was copying one another, and doing these different, so you've got the size of that bill, and then the size there, okay? right? And then you've got, again, totally different, right? Which are all different types of jerkbaits, really categorized by depth. Okay? And you've got them even within the same range, okay, that are just a little bit different, right? Okay? And they're angled a little bit different. So as that current and water flow hits, that's what it's about. What's causing that jerkbait, right, to do its thing? Well, as you're retrieving, okay, you're twitching or retrieving, the bait has to make its way through the water column, right? What's the resistance? Okay? What causes this bait to dive and this one to pop, right? It's that ratio, right? Surface area of the bill, the angle, okay? Right? That causes the different action. All right? And so the custom bait makers are changing the game. They're putting square bills on jerk baits, okay? They're rounding this off. I saw a pointer, okay, coming to almost a point, all right, for a darting action, right? And so all these things can, like, ultimately change the game for, like, jerkbait fishing. And a lot of people think it's just wintertime stuff. You know, I encourage people. You know, I had a conversation with a mate at one of the booths called the Twin Trawler. Okay, it's basically a two-man boat, about 10 feet. I think you're going to do a 12-footer. You can tag team fishing, okay, in terms of one person's throwing a jerkbait one way, one person's throwing the jerkbait another at different depths, right? To dial it in, right? Working together in that same small boat, okay? With the conditions being right, or doing two things entirely different. One guy's throwing a search bait while the other one's throwing the jerk bait. And one of the things I highly recommend for you this year because of live scope, because it is such a growing trend, okay, is don't use your live scope. You're like, what are you talking about, Jay? I just spent $2,500 on my live scope and you're telling me not to use it. Go out there and fish the way you would fish traditionally, what you know about your river system. Okay? Go through your section. Go through your natural progression of how you fish normally. Maybe it's your confidence baits. Maybe it's a jerk bait. You cover 25 to 45 yard area. Okay? I highly recommend this in spring, especially when the grass is all out. People, I cannot tell you how many times people have told me, Jay, there's no bass there. No bass live there. There's no bass. I've never caught a bass off that point. I've never caught a bass on that secondary point. I never caught a bass off that dock. I never. And because they haven't caught a fish there, they subjectively believe there's no fish there. Okay? So I encourage you to do that this year. Go out, fish traditionally for an hour or however time frame you want, cover an area, and then go back through that area with your live scope and find out what you missed. Find out what you didn't recognize or see that you're now seeing with your live scope. Okay? And then you'll begin to see, wait, there are fish there. The fish just aren't behaving the way I've been preconditioned to believe that fish should be behaving. What you're going to learn in 2023 on this channel, mates, is that a lot, not all, okay, a lot of what you hear about fish behavior isn't accurate. It's not accurate. Based on study after study after study of biology, and I know a lot of people don't want to read biology reports, okay, but when fish are now being tagged and they're tracking these fish where they were released, they were caught here and then here and then here over the course of time, it's showing you that all of the myths about fish behavior that are getting debunked. And people will probably still push back against reality. I mean, we've seen that with snakeheads. Like, people still think snakeheads are going to destroy their ecosystems because they've been bought a bill of goods and they've been preconditioned to believe snakehead's very, very bad, right? Or, when it's the catfish that could be very, very bad. We don't know, okay? But reality is the biology is telling us the grass is coming back better than ever now with the presence of a significant snakehead population. And if you have grass, you've got bait fish. You've got plankton. You've got all the microorganisms that you need in an ecosystem that's going to create a thriving fish population. When you lose that grass, you don't have that anymore. And then you're like the rivers have been for the last years after 2018, where they're predominantly dependent on crawl or shiner because there ain't no grass. Okay? But now the grasses are coming back and the rivers are starting to wake up again. The fish are getting bigger. There's a lot more for smallies to feed on, right? And so all of those things, factor in to this, okay, in terms of your catch rates. Entice the strike. That is your number one goal for 2023. Unlock 2023. Become a better angler on your river systems. Become a better smallie chaser. Is what do you have to do to entice the strike? Because you can't ever catch a fish if you don't first get a strike, right? And so everything needs to be about getting the strike. And then about you handling that strike, right? And we'll cover that in a few more videos coming up here in the Unlock series on different techniques you can do, different things of how you can fish for smallies with an open bail, whole bunch of different stuff that can change the game for you, that will also teach you all about rod tip feel, line feel, the right line weight for you to feel in your heavy action, light action, medium action, fast action rods, what's suitable for you and your style of fishing. Because let's face it, we're not Bassmaster Classic champions, okay? So our rate of feel, our rate in terms of, landing a fish is completely different than the guys that we watch on TV that we all follow. It just is. And so a lot of times that equipment and that setup isn't set. That reel's, I need a 7-2-1. I need this, I need that. Well, that's great, but what if that's not suitable for you as an angler? Okay? That's what you want to focus on this year. Is getting the right equipment for your style of fishing. Not your buddies, not a pro angler, not some guy, find out what it is, okay, in terms of that. And then address what you're doing. If you're not catching fish using a particular technique or application or lure, how are you actually fishing that? What changes can you make, okay, that's going to elevate your game and increase your catch rates? So again, some of these jerk baits, obviously, this is again, they're covered in this. I always forget to do this, and I'm sorry, mate. That is a Willamette Weapon custom jerk bait. This one is also a Willamette. This is a Jackal Rearrange. One of the best, phenomenal jerk bait. That coloration, anything with that chartreuse bottom, Western Maryland impoundments, you're going to be money on. And this is a underground tackle. Beautiful, beautiful jerk bait. Bryce does absolute phenomenal work. Find him on Instagram. All right, mates. Hope everybody's had a great day. Appreciate it. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And comment below if you got any suggestions on anything you would like to be covered in 2023.